All right. We're back on it. We're live. This is the RaceGuru Thunder Hour, brought to you by FantasyGuru.com as part of the Elite Fantasy Package. You can go forth, get the any of the Elite Sports packages over at FantasyGuru.com, including the MVP All-In Package for just $39.99. That's all the sports other than, say, NFL and MLB, but it does get you NBA and everything else for just $40. I know we're getting right into the promo stuff, but by the way, I'm Sean Engel. That's Mark Hogan there, DFS Marlin. We're the two hosts of the RaceGuru Thunder Hour this week there. Welcome back to the show, Mark. It was fun having you on last week. You get to roll it back around and race with us again.
Yes, sir. Excited to have to be back here and getting after it for another fun weekend in Atlanta to start the playoffs.
Yeah, Cup Series playoffs does begin this week. So, but also football season's beginning this week as well. So, lots of cool beginnings here at the beginning of September. I mean, we're still within like the first week of September. So, there you go.
It's money making season. This is the time of year where we got all the money in DFS for football. We got NASCAR playoffs going, so they're going to run some nice contests on that front. We've got a lot of DFS opportunities, so really looking forward to getting after it these next couple of weeks.
That is very true. And for anybody out there that also wants some more action from some of the other sports, you can go over to fantasyguru.com and get the MVP Platinum package, or you can get the All-In package. It contains all the sports you need for just one price. So you can go forth and check that out on fantasyguru.com. And you can also go forth and email support at fantasyguru.com to give you the best possible deal out there. So go forth, email support at Fantasy Guru. They'll hook you up. And just like we're going to hook you up here with RaceGuru Thunder Hour. And that includes Mark Hogan, who also contributes to the NFL.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Football season's been good, but look, NASCAR, we are still getting after it. Last weekend was quite the interesting weekend in the Cup race, especially with that quick burnout at the beginning of that one, and then Xfinity. We saw a lot of guys, a lot of sleepers move their way up to the top 15. So it was really nice to be able to see some of those guys that we had that we threw out there in the articles this weekend. So overall, it was a nice weekend.
Yeah, pretty solid weekend overall. But you know what? Let's react and recap the last weekend in NASCAR here. We were at Darlington Raceway. There were two races. The Truck Series was off once again this past weekend, and they're going to be off for a little while longer. It's going to be a little while until we see the trucks back. But let's talk Xfinity Series first. So in the Xfinity Series, Christopher Bell, he prevailed in NASCAR overtime over Cole Custer and Sheldon Creed. Bell was the dominant car of the race until Sheldon Creed, he took over late in the race, and it looked like he was going to cruise to victory until the caution came out for A.J. Allmendinger losing a right front tire, crashing into the wall. Pit stops happened. Creed came out in third. Custer came out in second, and then Bell led them to the line, and on that final restart, Bell just prevailed and held off Custer. So what did you think of the Xfinity Series race there, Mark? What was your thoughts on the finish and Sheldon Creed there?
Well, it was, obviously Bell was pretty dominant. I mean, he had 108 laps led, so we were on him. Sheldon Creed, I mean, will we see? I mean, how often are we going to actually see him win a race? Good Lord. But I think there's still better days to come here for him. And then, this was an interesting race because we had a lot of Cup guys coming down and participating as well. And I was super bummed because I was on guys like Gregson, Love, Kvapil. And the problem was I threw Logano in my lineup last second. I forget who in the Discord. Yeah, someone in the Discord was throwing out Logano. And I was like, you know what? Everything really looks good on him. There's a lot of good indicators. I'm going to go Logano in my final lineup as well. And it was, I mean, that was like early in the race too, when he wrecked. And so I was pretty bummed out by that. But Kind of lesson learned. I think he was using he was in the car that Haley Deegan was racing from earlier this year. Was that the case?
Yeah,
So I
AM
overlooked that.
Racing,
I
the number
overlooked that. That
15.
was a mistake. So, that's the thing that you have to learn from your mistakes. And if there's anything that I'm going to learn or try to remember is you got to pay attention to that type of stuff too. Even though they're coming down, what car are they driving in? What's the history behind it? And I forgot that he was coming down and doing that once Haley Deegan departed earlier this season. So, lesson learned.
Yeah, and I don't blame you because the last time Logano did step into that car, that was at the Chicago street race, and he ended up being the best finishing Ford driver that day, too. So it
Yeah.
just goes to show sometimes you never know about how these races will shake out. But AM Racing, though, they've been a shaky team all year long just because that the equipment sometimes has not gotten them through races. Sometimes that team's just been unfortunate in getting into accidents, or sometimes they just flat out don't have the speed.
Yeah.
It all depends.
And you get one wreck, I mean, that kills your lineup. And I think we'll probably talk about it here going into these races this weekend. But this might be one of those weekends where you're playing a couple different lineups for each of these slates, given how it might play out.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. So we touched on Sheldon Creed there. Do we think that he's gonna get a race win this season now that he's been through so many ways to lose races? I mean, they say sometimes you have to learn how to lose in order to win, but really at this point with Sheldon Creed, do we ever think he's going to win?
I mean, it feels like one of those years where he's not. But I mean, it's hard to tell. Look, he's been up there. He's been in the conversation for most of these races. So hard to say he can't do it. With that being said, I think there might be a mental hurdle. There might be a team issue, right? Synergy to come up with the right strategy in the right spot and know when to pivot. So sounds like a lot like DFS too, but. At the end of the day, I mean, we've only got so many more races left, and I don't know. It just doesn't feel like it's happening this year. So we'll see.
Yeah, only time can really tell for that one there, Mark. But it is something we're going to have to keep an eye on because Creed still has the most top 5 finishes of all the Xfinity regulars this year, too.
Like I said, I mean, he's been up there. He has been right there in the conversation. So you can't rule him out in that same breath.
Yeah, that is very true. Now let's get into the top place differential plays and the worst place differential plays of the week for Xfinity. Now, gaining 19 positions, which was the most, were 2 drivers. Cole Custer, who started 21st and finished second, and then Shane Van Gisbergen, who started 26th and finished 7th. Both top 10 finishes right there. Gaining 17 positions was Jesse Love, who started 23rd and finished 6th. And then gaining 14 positions were 2 drivers. Noah Gragson, who started 29th and finished 15th, and then Josh Williams, who started 30th and finished 16th there, Mark. So even though you mentioned about you wish that some of these Cup regulars and some of these drivers that you had your spotlight on would have done a little bit more, they all still had some pretty good place differential days.
Yeah, I mean Noah Gregson, Jesse Love. One guy I didn't write up was Josh Williams. I feel dirty writing Josh Williams up. So I don't know. I mean, look, I think he's got some pretty decent track history there. So that might be, something to keep note of for moving forward. And SVG, I mean, hey, I was throwing him out there as a sleeper more for the Cup. I think when we were talking about him last week than
Yep.
Xfinity, but I mean, there's a reason why I was throwing him out there. I think he's driving well right now, and there's a lot of positives coming out of that camp. So there he is again.
Yeah, there's been so many Xfinity races, especially on the ovals this year, where SVG's been consistent in that value tier, but then he ends up qualifying not too well because of his inexperience on the ovals. But then it happens every oval race, it seems, where SVG, he takes the first 2 stages of the race in order to learn the track and learn how the car works. And then by that final stage, he's up there advancing through the field almost every single time. And anybody that used SVG in Xfinity this week, that really paid off big time for them.
He's a dog. He's a dog. But look, I mean, I was I was very happy with Love. Love was 7,800. Noah Gragson was 8,300. So they paid off. Carson Kvapil at 7,200. So, I mean, he started 27th and finished 14th. So, we got to throw him out there too. He had a nice day.
Yes, indeedy. So, speaking of drivers that had nice days, well, in this case, not so nice days, let's get into the worst ones here. 27 positions back, which was the worst, were Parker Retzlaff, who started 9th and finished 36th, and Riley Herbst, who started 8th and finished 35th. Both of those drivers got involved in accidents. Brandon Jones lost 25 positions, as did Sam Mayer. Jones started 7th and finished 32nd. Mayer started 3rd, finished 28th. And then AJ Allmendinger, he lost 23 positions, starting from 4th, finishing 27th. All these drivers ended up getting involved in accidents pretty much, though, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah. The good thing is, I think most of these guys we were off of when I look back. Look, I did call out. So my core was Christopher Bell, Noah Gragson, and Ryan Sieg. So Ryan Sieg was kind of the downer amongst the core. He only put up 20 points. He started 13th and finished 18th. So it didn't completely kill you, but if you had any other misses like this, then you probably weren't cashing at that point. So, look, at the end of the day, we were 2 or 3 on the core. We saw a lot of guys, fall back that we weren't on here. So overall, we were on the right track, and just, you face a wreck like with Logano or someone like that, and you're automatically out. So,
yeah. Or in Logano's case, it wasn't a wreck, it was an engine failure.
Engine, I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah. And the thing is, like, Christopher Bell, we had him in the core, but like everyone was on Bell, right? It was kind of an obvious play. So an obvious pay up that you had to play. It was almost like a free square putting up like 87 DFS points. So
Yeah, not to mention he was starting right from the front anyway, so easy
yeah.
dominator choice.
Yep, exactly.
So, getting into the stage winners, pretty much Joe Gibbs Racing just dominated this race. Christopher Bell won the first stage. Sheldon Creed won the second. As for the lap leaders, Christopher Bell, he led 108 laps, as mentioned earlier. Sheldon Creed led 30. So, really, there's only 12 laps in the entire race not dominated by Joe Gibbs Racing. 11 of those was by Sam Mayer, and then Garrett Smithley led one there, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty much as expected. I don't think there was anything ultimately that stood out here as far as laps led. And Christopher Bell, like you said, started up front. We expected him to lead a lot of laps here.
Yes, that is very true. So now, was there anybody else that stood out to you within the final list of finishers before we move on to Cup there, Mark?
Well, I think I threw out Kvapil was the big one. And then what's going on with? I mean, I guess Corey Heim, he's still trying to get adjusted here, but I was expecting a little bit of a stronger showing from him. And Chase Elliott coming in fourth, typically a stronger track for him. So Allgaier in 10th. That was a disappointment. I think a lot of people were on Allgaier there, so including myself. He had to have liked him. I think he won the race prior. So
Yeah, he did.
Allgaier falling back. That was a little bit of a letdown for sure.
Yeah, just unfortunate right there. But it also goes to show with Chase Elliott. I do want to point that out there, as you mentioned. That Hendrick number 17 car is always a car we have to watch out for whenever it enters a race. And Elliott proved that right there with that 4th place finish.
That's exactly it.
All right, let's get on into the Cup Series race. So, Cup was a very, very interesting race, but I'd say that was classic vintage Darlington right there because, well, another new winner managed to walk off with a playoff spot in a last lap chase, and that was, well, Chase Briscoe. He held off Kyle Busch. He stayed ahead of Christopher Bell, Kyle Larson, and Ross Chastain to shock the NASCAR world and get his second career Cup Series victory.
I mean, Kyle Busch, I feel like, is like giving these races up on a week to week basis. One to Briscoe, we had one to Burton a few weeks ago. I mean, talk about him on this track upcoming this weekend to Daniel Suarez and with Ryan Blaney earlier this year. So, Man, it's been tough for Kyle Busch, but that was such a bummer about Blaney with Truex getting into him. I mean, that could have been anyone. It had nothing to do with Blaney there. Blaney was posed to have a good race. I feel like I dodged a bullet with him. I was about to roster him, but I ended up going a different direction. But good gracious. I mean, Truex just kind of just losing it and going right into Blaney, and just nothing Blaney can do there.
Yeah, Blaney was saying in his post-race interview that he was just trying to predict where Truex was going to go, and he ultimately chose the wrong direction and got right into him, and that ended both of their days. But even
I
despite
mean,
that though, Martin Truex Jr. he held on to one of the two final playoff spots on points. So
that's true. I mean, the other thing, and in Blaney's defense, my last point is that I mean, it looked like Truex was about to go the other way too. So it's hard to even blame him for picking the outside, because it truly looked like for a split second he was going to go in. Um, so really unfortunate. And yeah, I mean, that was the beginning, like lap 2 or lap
lap
3 or
two,
something like
lap
that.
two.
So for the Truex camp for the rest of that entire race to watch that play out and just kind of hold on to their butts to see if they're going to make it, that must have been pretty nerve-wracking the entire race for them.
Yeah, it certainly would have. And you know what? Had that Austin Dillon win stood and that made it for playoff eligibility, they would have been even more nervous because, well, as breaking down through the final points, Truex would not have made the playoffs if Dillon's win stood. He would have
Yeah, I'm
missed it
glad
by
they did
6
that.
points over Ty Gibbs.
Yeah, I mean that was not. I mean, I'm glad they didn't give it to Dylan there. And look, I mean it's Truex, so it's nice to have him in the playoffs too. So he's
And
barely
his
squeaked
retirement
in. We'll see
season,
what
too.
happens. Exactly, exactly.
Well, as for Chris Buescher and Bubba Wallace, their 6th place and 16th place finishes, respectively, weren't enough in order to get them in the playoffs either.
Yeah, I mean Bubba Wallace. Obviously, that was heartbreaking to see. It was interesting. I'm sure you caught it, but it was like earlier in the race they were interviewing Michael Jordan, and he's like giving him a pep talk, like a motivational speech on national television to try and like hype him up mid race, and then he wrecks.
To
So
be fair, that wreck was not his fault. He just happened to get
no,
caught up in it.
yeah, it was very unfortunate for him. Another just guy that was in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, but Chris Buescher, I mean, that's been a frustrating season for him as well.
Yeah, he had 2 big coulda, woulda, shouldas. One of them being the first race at Darlington, and then, well, that other woulda, coulda, shoulda was Kansas, where he lost in the closest finish ever in Cup history.
Yep. Yeah. That's a tough one.
Tough deal indeed. But you know what wasn't so tough was the regular season championship. Or rather, I guess it was because it was only decided by exactly 1 point. Tyler Reddick, who finished in the 10th position, won it over Kyle Larson, who finished in the 4th position there, Mark.
Yeah, Tyler Reddick. I mean, he was sick the whole race. So I was actually bummed about that because I think I rostered Reddick, and I mean, he was looking pretty good. And then you could tell as he started to get sick, he got sick literally in the car. And then even when they had him coming on the pit stop and they relayed him like some meds and stuff, he apparently dropped the medicine while he was in the car leaving the pit stop. And then so he had to go a whole other stage basically until he could come back in and pit again to get some of those meds. So it's just funny to kind of hear like, oh, I'm about to throw up. It's about to come out the other end. I don't know what to do. But so kudos to him for hanging in there.
Yeah, it just goes to show how tough these drivers are. There's been times when drivers have been having to race while they're injured or even sick, and they still just carry on.
I mean, just imagine going up and down on the throttle while it's like you're just trying to hold it in.
There's actually been races before in NASCAR history, Mark, where even a driver that's been sick and ready to throw up ends up going to win races. It's happened
Really?
before.
Oh, okay. Okay. I mean, I was ready to live bet him or something. I was like, man, this is like a Michael Jordan flu game all over again here. So,
Yeah, there you
um,
go. Bet the flu game.
yeah. Unfortunately, I feel like NASCAR doesn't really work that way, but
Not always, but
not often.
there is the occasional time.
Yeah.
But I did want to point out about the regular season championship, though, too, is the thing that's interesting about it, though, is that if Kyle Larson never missed that race in Charlotte from the beginning, he would have been the one winning the regular season championship right there because that was the difference.
1000%. I mean, the fact that he pretty much almost won it, without an entire race, it's like it was a handicapped. So I mean, it just goes to show how dominant of a driver he is. Although, I mean, not to preview too much this upcoming race, this might be one of the few spots where we might not be going after Kyle Larson here. So it'll be interesting to see what the ownership is on him this weekend, but I'm probably going in a different direction.
Yeah, this is to get ahead of ourselves, I guess. This type of track is not really fit for someone like Larson. He does not have the best of luck on these tracks. That is
Nope.
for sure.
Nope.
Getting back towards this week's race, let's get into the place differential plays of the week here, shall we? So, the top ones at 18 positions, the best driver in place differential, Ryan Preece, started 30th, finished 12th. Then at plus 17 positions, Ross Chastain started 22nd, finished 5th. And then plus 16 positions, Todd Gilliland, the Todd father. I mentioned him on the show last week there. He started 33rd. He finished 17th there, Mark. So good days from all three of these drivers.
Yeah, in result of your recommendation, I ended up having him in my final lineup this week. So I mean, he was 6,800 and he got me 44 points. So that's a pretty good return.
Very true. And just to also point this out, all three of these drivers were mentioned in the write up this week for Cup. So
Yep.
kudos to myself on that one.
100%. And look, Ross Chastain, I think we talked about him a lot. I mean, all of these, it's nice to see a lot of these guys that we're writing up and talking through. So,
That is very true. Now, getting into the worst ones of the week, two drivers ended up losing the most positions at 31. Carson Hocevar, who started second, finished 33rd, and then Martin Truex Jr., who we mentioned earlier. He started fifth, finished 36th. Then losing 30 positions, again, Ryan Blaney started seventh, finished 37th, and then losing 22 positions there. William Byron started eighth, finished 30th, Mark.
okay, so I missed what happened to William Byron here. Obviously, Blaney and Truex, we know about that. Hocevar was, I wouldn't say expected, but it was expected that he'd move back. I just didn't think he'd go back that far. But he spun out and then I think wrecked at a certain point. Multiple cautions by Hocevar. So Byron stood out to me, and then another guy that I thought I would mention, I rostered him, and so this is what hurt me. But Josh Berry, I thought he could hang
Yeah.
around that 15 spot, and he went all the way down to 31. So that was a bummer, and that was pretty late in the race where I think he got involved in that wreck. So.
Yeah, that was that multi-car accident that we mentioned that affected Bubba's day right there. It
Hmm.
ended Byron and Barry's day.
Hmm. Oh, okay. Byron was in that too. I didn't even realize that. Yeah. Yeah, the broadcast, man. Sometimes they focus on one guy. They're talking about Bubba Wallace, and you see four other cars being pulled off or whatever, and they don't even address it. So I don't know. Do better.
Yeah, these broadcasts sometimes. This has really just been a broadcast thing all year. Although I will
Yeah.
say, I think NBC's done a little bit better job covering it than Fox has. They're still all missing things all around here too. I get it because sometimes it's a lot of drivers to cover at once, but even so, maybe even just a mention.
Yep.
Come on.
I mean, you got a whole broadcast team. You guys are getting paid a bunch of money to do this. Like, come on.
It is absolutely crazy. Speaking of things that were crazy, let's get into the stage winners and lap leaders here. Well, I mean, this pretty much was a dominance fest by Kyle Larson for most of this race. He swept the first two stages. He also led the most laps at 263 there, Mark. Bubba Wallace led 37. Chase Briscoe, he led 29 laps. Denny Hamlin, 21. Josh Berry led 5. SVG ended up leading 4 laps. Ross Chastain with 3. Byron with 2. And then Ty Gibbs, Tyler Reddick, and Christopher Bell all led 1 lap there, Mark.
Yeah, big day for Larson. I mean, from a DFS standpoint, basically you had to roster him if you wanted to cash. He was 47% owned in this high stakes tournament I played in. 124 fantasy points. So we were talking about Christopher Bell in the Xfinity race, putting up 87 and having a dominant day. Well, 124 points is a nail in the coffin, and he also added 40 fastest laps to that as well. So always got to remember the dominators. You're going to get the fastest laps on top of the lap sled. Typically, those are going to layer over because when you're in the front, you're normally going to get more speed there.
Yeah, that clean air advantage. That's a big thing on any track that isn't a super speedway. So, something to really keep in mind, especially if you're going for that particular statistic. Now, is there any other finishers within the Cup race there that we want to cover before we move on?
I think for me, I would say we covered a lot of the guys. I was a little disappointed with Chase Elliott. I thought he'd have a little bit of a better day. And Justin Haley, 27th wasn't amazing, but I guess it didn't kill you. So, but Denny Hamlin. Okay, so the thing about Hamlin is, even though this is a good thing to point out, actually, Hamlin was the most expensive driver. He was more than Larson. He didn't pay off like Larson, but look, he went from 14th to 7th, but he got points because of those fastest laps. So we were just talking about that statistic. I mean, he only had 21 laps led, but getting, 47 fastest laps here because he always takes these contrarian strategies. He put up 70.5 points. So that is something to remember, especially with fastest laps on these types of tracks, is that, when you're going after maybe 2 dominators in your lineup, that's a creative way to come up with those points. And we have to remember that from a strategic standpoint is you could have, theoretically in this race fit both of those guys in and then punted in some other spots to fill out your lineup.
Yeah, that's very true. And that's a really good point to mention there, Mark. Something that I don't always actually consider within my lineups, but Hamlin was on that contrarian strategy in order to take tires at a different time, and then at points he would become the fastest car on track by default just because he was on much fresher tires than the drivers that were out front. So good call there.
Yeah, very cheap way. I mean, look, I wish it's hindsight, right, to point it out now, but it's something to mine from this and remember for future races.
Yeah, that is for sure. We know that Denny Hamlin is one of those drivers, and that number 11 team, they like to take contrarian strategies. There's a few drivers and teams in the field that really do often rely on some of these contrarian pit strategies in order to really gain track position. Like the number 11 team is one of those. Both of the front row drivers this year, Michael McDowell and Todd Gilliland, they've been known to do some of that this year as well. So something that we have to keep in mind, and it all just goes to show when you get to know these teams, you get to know how they go through their strategies, how they like to plan races out. Knowing that can be a big advantage for DFS, a real
Yeah.
big advantage.
Yep. Gotta think about that, especially Denny. So
Any other final thoughts before we go through and move on with the rest of the show here?
no, I think that's it. I mean, I was definitely bummed out with Josh Berry because he ruined my day. I just missed cashing. If he didn't wreck in that, I probably would have had I would say a 10x day. So and I was in the red. So unfortunately, got hurt by a couple wrecks this weekend. But generally speaking, felt good about a lot of the guys that we were on. So expecting a bounce back here going into this weekend.
All right, all right. But before we get into this weekend, we do have some news items that we want to hit for that will affect both the future and this week's race. Let's get into the big silly season rumor/report that came out very, very recently about RFK Racing. Now, per the Athletic there, Jordan Bianchi, he reported that RFK Racing is expected to expand to 3 teams and sign Ryan Preece for 2025. Now, Ryan Preece, he is the last of the Stewart-Haas Racing drivers that do not have a cup home for next season so far. So seeing him sign with RFK, especially because the whole reason why RFK might be expanding the 3 is because they might be landing the sponsorship from Kroger, actually, which would give them a lot of extra funding in order to maybe get themselves another chartered ride. So very interesting overall with Priest there, because he also has a past relationship with Kroger. Both him and Chris Buescher back when they used to drive for JTG Daugherty Racing. So what do you think of this report here, Mark, about Ryan Preece to RFK next year?
I think it definitely, hey, look, give him some more money, maybe a little bit better equipment. I think you could see some improvements and a nice DFS opportunity. He's going to be a cheap guy, so or a cheap driver, I should say. And I mean, at the end of the day, Chris Buescher had a pretty darn good year. He just had some frustrating finishes, so we could see this team come on pretty strong next year, I'd say.
Oh, yeah, for sure. We know that Brad Keselowski himself is in the playoffs this year, too. And last year, both of the RFK cars were in the playoffs. So
Yeah.
just goes to show, I think this team might be an upgrade for Ryan Preece overall, too, especially where I think it's going to really be impactful for Preece, if this ends up being the case where he goes to RFK, is on the short tracks, because Preece is a modified short track racer. So that's his
Yeah.
background. And, RFK, they've been mighty good at the shorter tracks within the last 2 years. So very interesting to consider there, Mark.
100%.
All right. So getting into our next news item here, this one is about Martin Truex Jr. here. Now, we know Martin Truex Jr. has stated in the past that he is going to make a start in the Daytona 500 next year, despite retiring from full-time competition after this year. Now, what we do know now is that he will return to the Daytona 500 with his former crew chief, Cole Pearn. This is very big. I'm not sure if you know about Cole Pearn here, Mark. But he used to be the former crew chief of Martin Truex Jr. back during his time with Furniture Row Racing, and was a part of some of Martin's best seasons ever in the Cup Series, including the year where Martin won his only Cup championship in 2017. So crew chiefs, they're a very big deal, especially when they have a very good connection with a particular driver, like in this case, Martin Truex with Cole Pearn. This is going to make things very interesting, especially seeing both of this duo just reunite, and they're going to have some good equipment because they're going to be connected with Gibbs in some way or fashion for their entry there, Mark.
That would be interesting I mean, a guy that's retired to still come back in 2025 and steal a race or something. That would be pretty fascinating to see. And it
Yeah.
definitely sounds possible given the pairing.
Oh, yeah, for sure. In fact, actually, that duo nearly won the Daytona 500 back in 2016, where they lost by mere inches to Denny Hamlin.
We'll see. I mean, look, I don't know enough about how they do their off-season prep for a guy that's not going to be, racing throughout the year. So that's probably, I would say, my biggest concern. But it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to watch going into next year.
Yeah, very interesting, especially because, Martin has stated that he did want to maybe do some one-off races or a few part-time starts here and there, whether it's been Cup or Xfinity. He did say that he has interest in racing at Rockingham next year for Xfinity. So,
Oh, okay, interesting. All right,
yeah,
maybe we see him and Ryan on the same track that week.
that could be very interesting. Very, very interesting overall. So, yeah, this is the sort of knowledge that you can get by just studying up the history, focusing on the sport. Like we talked about off air beforehand about how this could really come into play, and especially could be the difference between being a good DFS NASCAR player and a great one. So, what were your thoughts on that for the audience there, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the more that we talk about it, we hear Jeff Manns talk about it, right? Where it's like, the numbers only take you so far, and so the more that we can, apply our actual knowledge of the sport um, beyond what's on paper, the more edge that we have, because everyone is looking at the numbers, everyone is looking at historical, race results and historical track history and all that stuff. But what's going, where can you read between the lines? That's how you get the true edge. So the news, the context between what you see on paper versus what actually happened in the race, that matters significantly. So it just goes to show, and that's why I was saying before we came on the recording, that's why it's so nice to work with you and work with Rich, because you guys have been following NASCAR for a long time, and you can tell just by talking it with you, and you just did it right there. You threw out some race results from 2016, 2017, 7, 8 years ago in a previous generation car, and but even that kind of stuff, even if it's a different car, it still matters given how these guys race and what tracks and what types of tracks they do well at.
Yeah, and chemistry is a very, very big thing in NASCAR. Sometimes a driver can be as good as they can be, but if they don't have the right crew chief behind them, if they don't have the right team behind them, they're not going to be at their very best. And you know why I also bring this up is because this actually segues very, very well into our next news story that we're covering here. And that addresses this week here with the number 9 and number 8 junior motorsports teams swapping crew chiefs this weekend, starting at Atlanta. So the number 8 crew chief right now is going to be going to the number 9, the crew chief for Brandon Jones. And then the number 9 crew chief for Brandon Jones is going to the number 8 with Sammy Smith now starting this week there, Mark.
Yeah, this kind of stuff freaks me out. The experimental types of moves here, that just makes me. Hey, look, it's high risk, high reward. You go after it, and maybe it works out great for someone like a Brandon Jones, but maybe they fall flat on their face. They try something new, and that they get a penalty, or the spotter is messing with them that they're not used to. I mean, there's so many different things that can happen here. So I'm looking more in the spots for the guys that are competing in the playoffs, the guys that are looking to get stage points and accumulate points versus taking a shot at like going after first and potentially wrecking or something like that.
That is true, but I think you mentioned about the playoffs. Xfinity Series, they still
Yeah,
have about 3 races until their playoff field is set. And this is
fair.
why this is very interesting in order to note, too, because when you look at the playoff situations for both of these drivers, Sammy Smith, he's currently trying to fight for a playoff spot on points, where Brandon Jones, he's just too far back to the point where he has to win in order to get in. So this is what makes this crew chief swap very intriguing, especially because it happens with just a few races before the playoffs there, Mark.
It's definitely a Hail Mary type of move for sure.
Definitely for certain. You know what? Let's get into our coverage for the race this week there, Mark. Let's get into previewing Atlanta. Hot Atlanta. So we got ourselves a 1.5 mile super speedway race here. We're back using the super speedway rules package. So we've been out in Atlanta once before early on in the year. We've already experienced a couple of super speedway races at Daytona and Talladega. Now, the racing over at Atlanta, it's going to be interesting because it is going to be pack racing, just like Daytona, just like Talladega. But the track length and how much room there is on track is quite different compared to those two tracks. And as a result, it makes the racing just a little bit different and just a little more unique, Mark. What do you think of Atlanta this week?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a super speedway type of approach here. A little bit different. I think we were talking about it before, but probably not as volatile as maybe some of these other tracks here, where you can get a guy that's like in 34th go up to like 8th or something like that. But you could get a guy who's in like 26 go up to 3rd type of thing. So you don't want to rule that type of place differential out. We're certainly want to, target some guys towards the top. I think ultimately this week is going to depend on what type of contest you're entering from a DFS standpoint. So if you're going after those large GPPs, then it probably makes sense to target a lot more of those individuals in the top 15 and hope for maybe not too much of a shakeup up front. But if you're going after raw points and maybe a smaller tournament or even a cash type of contest, then you might want to strategize and go after more of a place differential type of approach there. Go for guys that are going to secure that increase in points towards the bottom end. So I really think it's contest dependent this week, depending given how this track lays out and what we're looking at here.
Yeah, that is a very good point in order to bring up, because contest selection this is a track where it does matter, especially where if you're in GPP where you're going to want to be different, you do have lots of options in order to be different this week. But if you want your safer options, well, especially after qualifying will happen, and qualifying is going to be huge this week.
No
Yeah,
practice.
no practice, just qualifying. Yeah, it's going to be a very big deal, just because then you'll be relying on some of those drivers that have deep place differential upside in order to really bring the results for your fantasy teams this week.
100%. I think it's definitely more probable that you're going to get points out of place differential, but again, if you're looking to get a little bit different, then it might be, smarter to load your lineup more towards the, guys that have starting position in the top 15.
That is for sure. And yet we always mention this too. When it comes to these sorts of races, anytime it's a super speedway, we do occasionally get the question, how much money should I leave on the table? The way I always say is that you just go after the drivers that you want to get and not think about how much money you're leaving on the table. Just start whoever you like, go forth, hope it also hits, and just know that even if you're saving, like, say, 1,000 or 2,000 in salary, if you're leaving that much on the table, you still have a lineup that could go forth and have a really, really big day. It's true.
100%. Yeah, like you probably don't want to be leaving like 10K on the table or anything like that, but 1 or 2 grand is 100% in the wheelhouse. And not to mention, like, you don't even have to get too crazy or creative to leave that type of money on the table and throw a different lineup out there. So it can still be a lot of the big names. And I always like that strategy. It's like, a lot of the names that people are on and, guys that have great track history, all that good stuff. But you still get different by just leaving money on the table alone. And it's just human nature for everyone to want to be able to, spend up and not leave anything, not leave any fat.
That is very true. And you know what? When we talk about this race in regards to betting, this is one of those races where instead of targeting just a few drivers in order to win, this is one of those races where I would love to spread the love around when it comes to betting, just because there's so many different drivers that have the opportunity to win one of these races. Say, for example, you're going for an outright. We also notice here too, when we look at, like, say, the sports books, the betting odds, most weeks when you see the top favorite, you'll be around maybe, say, plus 400, plus 500. Here, for example, we look at this race over from DK Sportsbook. The top favorite, Ryan Blaney, is at plus 900. What a
Yeah.
difference.
Yeah, it's really spread out at the top. From a betting perspective, full transparency. I don't know if I'm going after a lot of these win ones, but one spot, and I'm just going to throw it out there right now. I know I'm kind of going off the rails here, but the manufacturer props I really like. So if you're looking at top Toyotas, the smallest group here, and the payoff is super high for some of these guys at the bottom that have good that really have good setups here. So, like, for example, you got John Hunter Nemechek at plus 2,500 on DraftKings, Eric Jones at plus 1,100, and Ty Gibbs at plus 700 for top Toyota. Think about it. I mean, Martin Truex is in that group. He's kind of like the dead man walking. Bubba Wallace, I mean, he just wrecked. This could be another track where we might see him have trouble as well. And then you have Denny Hamlin and Tyler Reddick. So if you can beat those two, if one of those three can beat those two out and you place a bet on all of those three, all you need is just one of them to pay off and you're going to have a really nice day.
That is very true. The Toyotas are probably the easiest in order to figure out betting if you're going for one of those top car bets, but some of the Chevy and Ford ones are also very interesting too. Like I was looking at the top Ford there, one name that immediately came to mind just because of how deep the odds were was Todd Gilliland at plus 1,600 to be top Ford.
Yeah,
That really stood out, especially when you consider the fact that the matter was he led about 52 laps at this race earlier in the year.
He just had a nice race, so he's driving well. And the other thing too is like the reason why I think these props for this particular race are interesting is because again, like anyone can get knocked out of this race here. So it's like, what happens if like Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson get into it, and Kyle Larson is just, this isn't a good looking race for him anyways. So I could totally see that happening and him taking out Denny. And then it's like, again, like I'm looking at the Toyotas, it's just 8 drivers. You could take 3 of the 8. They only need to beat the remaining guys. So I don't know. I think going after these manufacturer props might be the spot to target here.
What about some of these group winner bets that are also very interesting too?
Yeah, let's take a look here. I haven't looked at the group winners a whole lot, but so Daniel Suarez, I feel like, is getting a little bit of disrespect here. He just won. He just won on the track. He's still plus 240 in this group
Group
with
C
Buscher,
winner.
Reddick, and Chastain.
Yeah. Suarez versus Buscher, Reddick, and Chastain. Yeah. That's an interesting group right there, especially because this is also a good track for Ross Chastain as well. Ever since he's been a part of Trackhouse, he's been really good at this track as well. So something to also keep in mind there too.
I mean, Blaney and Keselowski in that Group A. I mean, those are some decent bets too. So I don't mind these group winners too. I definitely think I need to look at the groups a little bit more here before I pull the trigger on anything like that. But the manufacturer props, I definitely think I'm like going after some of those cheap Toyota guys.
Good call. Good call over all there, Mark. And I think we've laid out everything nicely here. We'll definitely have more as the week progresses and we get more information. But speaking of some information, let me quickly rattle off the notable drivers and part-timers for this week here. Trucks, as we mentioned earlier, they're not having a race this week. No need to worry about that. In the Xfinity Series, we have CJ McLaughlin in the 07 for SS Greenlight Racing, Mason Massey in the other SS Greenlight entry in the number 14. Lawless Allen is in the number 15 for AM Racing this week. Taylor Gray is back in the number 19 for Joe Gibbs Racing in Xfinity. That's one to watch right there. And speaking of ones to watch, we have Ryan Truex back in the number 20 for Joe Gibbs Racing. Remember, he won the last race at the Super Speedway for Xfinity with JGR in his last appearance. So something to keep in mind there. Corey Heim, he's back again in the 26 for Sam Hunt Racing. Mason Maggio in the number 35. Not really expecting as much there. Garrett Smithley's in the 45 for Alpha Prime. Morgan Baird is in the number 53 for Joey Gase Motorsports. Not really feeling that one too much so far, as is the case for Dawson Cram in the number 74 for Mike Harmon Racing. And then there's Nick Lights in the number 92 for DGM Racing, which that could be an interesting one to watch depending on where he qualifies. As for the Cup Series, we have Cody Ware in the number 15 for Rick Ware Racing. Shane Van Gisbergen is back in the number 16 for Colican Cup, so he's doing double duty this week. JJ Yaley is in the number 44, and BJ McLeod is in the number 78. I think McLeod, out of those last two names, could be one to consider if you're looking to make a cash lineup there, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, super cheap driver. I think he's got some good run here in Atlanta, so that would be interesting. A lot of these cheap guys. That's the challenge with this with the slate is, I mean, if you look at that bottom range, there's like 7 or 8 guys that I'm willing to go after this week. So it is really that's why my approach from a DFS standpoint, this is absolutely not a week where I'm going one lineup. I'm definitely doing multiple lineups for each of these slates. I'm going lighter in general because you just have to be careful on these types of tracks with your money and what you're investing in. It might almost be smarter to invest in betting more than DFS this weekend.
True, true. Good points overall there. Now, before we get into our driver picks, I'm just going to plug fantasyguru.com, the website that allows us to have this nice and brand awesome show here, and say that you can always go forth and get the MVP all-in package, NBA plus all other sports, including our NASCAR coverage there for one low price of $40. You can go forth to Fantasy Guru, get that package now, as well as any of the other packages like the MVP Platinum package or the all-in package, which includes the NFL content, the MLB content. You can get that for one nice price. Go over and hit up support at fantasyguru.com. Send them an email. Let them know that you want to have the best possible deal that you can get for NFL season and beyond, and they'll be sure to hook you up, just like we're going to hook you up with these nice and awesome driver picks. So let's get on into it here. Let's get into our top price picks to watch. And although Mark isn't Rich Mileto, just like Rich Mileto, he's matching up with me as far as driver picks, because for our top price drivers to watch, we're on the same 3 drivers here: Ryan Blaney, Brad Keselowski, Chase Elliott. Mark, what do you think of these 3 drivers? Why do you like them as much as I do this week?
I mean, they've all got great track history, so you can't ignore it. Ryan Blaney, I mean, he should have. I mean, he was right there. He could have won the race earlier this year. We look at I mean, his starting position over the last several races, and he started 6th and finished 2nd earlier this year. He started, a little bit of a downer last year in July, where he started 2nd and finished 9th, and started 3rd and finished 7th, but then he went from 6th to 5th. So he's like in the top 5 every single one of these races here. Really just depends. I think we were talking about it before, but qualifying is going to be a massive, massive deal as far as who we're targeting in DFS. So we're not locked in, but again, Brad Keselowski, another big time driver. Chase Elliott, right there as far as average finishing position. Has got wonderful track history as well. So, I mean, you can't go wrong with these guys. I just think that these are the top price guys to go after. Chase Elliott is the least expensive of the 3, so he's the most economical, but in turn will be the chalkiest of the 3, I would think. So you have to keep that in mind. And if you dare to throw all 3 of these guys in your lineup, just know that probably 60% of the field is going to have these same 2 of these 3 guys in their lineup. So just keep that in mind. I think that it's really important to stay away from ownership this week.
That is very true. And something that also we have to keep in mind there, we mentioned about starting position. Another thing to keep in mind is that sometimes these drivers can go off and lead laps. Ryan Blaney is the absolute perfect example of this, because within all the races since Atlanta's had its reconfiguration to how it is now in 2022, Ryan Blaney has led in every single Atlanta race. Absolutely incredible. And within 4 of the 5 races at Atlanta in this span, a driver rating of over 100.
Yeah.
He's never won, but man, he's been competitive and quite close. So have to point that out there too.
He might be kind of lower in ownership than you would think, just because the odds are so spread out. And also, he just got wrecked last week, which had nothing to do with him. So you might just have a lot of people not want to go after the guy that just burned him too, from a wreck standpoint.
That's also possible too. And then Chase Elliott, he's finished top 15 or better in all of his Atlanta starts since 2022 at this track there too. So it's been mighty consistent as well. Now let's get into our mid-tier drivers to watch. And hey, guess what? We overlap on all of them once again. So there you go. We'll just name the drivers here. Ross Chastain, Daniel Suarez, and then we both pivoted with our last choice here, depending on which site you play. And for DraftKings, we recommend Austin Cindric. And for FanDuel, we like Ty Gibbs there. Mark, give us your reasoning to why we're both on these drivers this week here.
Yeah, I mean, Austin Cindric, I think he runs pretty well on these tracks. They're in the playoffs, right? So Austin Cindric, Ty Gibbs, they're both looking to maintain that playoff position. So at the end of the day, even though we tend to think Daniel Suarez is a guy that is inconsistent and can wreck your lineup, that's kind of the case for a lot of drivers in this one, but also he might be a little bit more careful while also maintaining that efficiency with how good he is on this track to pay off his $7,400 price point on DraftKings. So, and then it's really the same type of conversation with Austin Cindric as well. I like Suarez a little bit more than Cindric if you want to prioritize and not play both of them. And I think both of these guys probably are going to be chalky as well. So I do think you have to take a stand and maybe if you're gonna, like, for example, go with like a Blaney and Elliott, then you can't go Suarez and Gibbs. So that's kind of the dilemma that I'm running into, is just the most economical options are also going to be the chalkiest options. And in a race like this, you will really need to avoid the chalk here.
That's also a good point to mention there. That's also why I also like Ross Chastain quite a bit, because I think he's going to be a driver that's not going to be on the radar as much, but he has really good history at this track. Both of the Trackhouse drivers there, we mentioned both of them, Ross Chastain and Daniel Suarez. Suarez, he has 4 finishes inside the top 10 within the starts at Atlanta since 2022. He won at the race earlier this year. And then Ross Chastain, he's been right there as well. He's been very, very solid at this track since 2022. He has 3 top 10 finishes and 4 inside the top 15, 2 of those being second place finishes in both of the 2022 events at the site overall. And as for Austin Cindric, well, this is another great track for him. And Ty Gibbs has been incredibly solid here, too. Now, my preference towards Cindric versus Gibbs is that on DraftKings, their prices are very similar. I think Cindric is the better overall pick there. But the price difference between Cindric and Gibbs on FanDuel is so great that it makes me favor Gibbs, just economically speaking over there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I want to go back on Chastain here real quick and just get your take on how do you think he's going to approach this race given his standing? I mean, he's not in the playoffs, right? So is he going to take a shot at first? And do you think there's higher risk of a DNF with a guy like him, or how do you feel about Chastain and on that kind of in those terms when it comes to the fact that he's not in the postseason?
So regarding Chastain, well, not being in the playoffs or not even being in the contention for the championship has not stopped Chastain before from going for the win. You could look at the Phoenix race last year for no bigger proof than that overall. But I think the plan is, because Daniel Suarez, his teammate, is in the playoffs. I think he's going to work on helping his teammate as much as possible until it gets towards crunch time when he can get the win. If he knows he's in a position in order to get a victory for himself there, he's going to take that chance. But if he's going to be in a position in order to help Suarez in order to get a great day, or maybe even help him to a win, if Chastain knows he himself can't do it, then that's what I think the strategy is going to be. That's usually how these 2-car teams handle themselves within the playoffs.
And we were talking about it a little bit before the show, but it's like that's something that I need to look more into leading up to this weekend, is these, which cars could be helping other guys in the playoffs out versus ones that, what teams can I maybe exploit here to target and maybe get an advantage of on that front. So I don't know if there's other instances like that, but That's certainly, I think, a spot worth exploring going into the weekend.
Oh, definitely for sure. And that's just it's a big deal on these super speedways, especially because the manufacturers like having all their cars work together. And then these teams themselves always say rely on your teammates for these races if possible in order to get yourself the most speed in order to overtake other cars when it matters. We've seen it at Daytona, we've seen it at Talladega. Manufacturers will ride with others of a similar make. The Chevys will ride with the Chevys, the Fords will ride with the Fords, and the Toyotas will ride with the Toyotas. But also, say for example, it comes down to an overtime restart at the end. Say for example, Daniel Suarez is leading, and then Ross Chastain is in third. Of course, he's going to end up picking the lane in order to help his teammate win, because if he himself doesn't win, it still is a great thing for the overall race team if his teammate, who is in the playoffs, ends up winning. That that helps the company as a whole. It helps
Yeah.
Chastain help make the team look better in order to help fulfill sponsor obligations and all that, for example.
This is the type of stuff that we're talking about, though. It's like, you have to look beyond the numbers. You have to look at some of these scenarios. You have to look at who might be helping who and where these guys are starting into. Like, I feel personally like if Chastain and Suarez start somewhere close to each other, that's even more of an advantage. So qualifying is going to be huge when it comes to that type of stuff as well.
Yeah, and it's something that we'll have to keep in mind. And this is one of the reasons why we also say that live betting actually, is great for a race like this. Because if you see these two drivers working together, and if it's like late enough into the race where you can consider maybe throwing down a live outright bet to win, that could easily pay off. We've seen
Yeah.
it time and time again where a teammate pushes another to a win countless times on these types of tracks.
Yeah.
All right, now that we've gone through that point, that's important to note. Let's quickly get into our sleepers and value plays here. So this is where we finally be different for those following along with our picks. So I have Eric Jones, Justin Haley, and Daniel Hemrick. I really like all three of these drivers, especially Eric Jones. He's historically been very good at Atlanta since the 2022 reconfiguration. And even with Legacy Motor Club, even with Toyota support, he typically runs around top 15 most of the time within this race. He finds his way into the top 10 sometimes. He's even been in contention for a few wins at this track before as well. So something to keep in mind. Justin Haley's historically had some good finishes at Atlanta as well. And he's a driver that typically doesn't always qualify the best. We can really exploit that here this week. And then when it comes towards drivers that you want maybe a safer option, especially if you're spending low on a driver in order to round out your lineup, Daniel Hemrick I find to be a very good call because he's finished inside the top 20 in all super speedway events this year. And considering his price point, you can just stick him in there, and that provides so much cap flexibility, regardless of DraftKings or FanDuel this week. And we've said it before on the show. Both Rich and I say that he's a driver that just finishes races. Well, for Atlanta, that's huge, very huge.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, you're definitely looking for guys that are going to finish here, and for an inexpensive play too. That is a massive advantage. We were talking about it before, but it's like there are so many spots we can target. I like all of those guys that you just mentioned. I am in agreement with Justin Haley too. I think we've had a couple kind of quieter weeks out of Haley, so the industry's coming off him a little bit. And because we're spread out and have so many different options, I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of ownership there. So, big fan of the Haley play. I have Ricky Stenhouse too. I mean, he's historically, he's a guy that can run this track well. Ricky Stenhouse is the alternative though, so we have to be wary of that. And I would imagine everyone's on Ricky Stenhouse because it's going to go one way or the other. He's either going to get you a ton of place differential or he's going to wreck and ruin your lineup. So, but he has to be considered. Corey LaJoy has two top five finishes. I believe that's in the is it in the Cup Series that I was looking at that earlier?
Yeah, he has
I
2
want to say
top
in the
5
Cup.
finishes, both within the March races at Atlanta, 2022 and 2023.
And even this year, I mean, earlier this year in that race in February, he went from 32nd to 13th. So Corey LaJoie runs this one well. I think a lot of people. I think he's also racing better right now. The last couple of weeks, I think he's started to, go trend upwards again. And when I look back, John Hunter Nemechek, it's not just in I wouldn't say necessarily in Cup, but I mean he won the Xfinity race back in July. He has finished and done very well in the Truck Series here. So I think that can certainly translate for a driver at $5,600, and he can get us some nice place differential too. So there's a lot of value plays because I agree with all the guys that you just said too, and it's all about just where they qualify to determine who can give you the most upside, and then not falling on one of these mines because ultimately some of these guys are going to wreck.
Yeah.
I wish I could bet on Ricky Stenhouse wrecking, but I don't think that's a thing that you can bet on. So it's too negative.
Yeah, because then that would be the one with the lowest odds every time.
Yeah. But like he's just such a risk. So his ownership might be under control just because of the fact that there's so many people that are hesitant to click his name. So we'll see. But I like Nemechek because that gives you someone in the $5,000 price range, which I think you need to get someone in that range for this type of build.
Yeah, I agree that you're going to want to look for somebody down there in order to really just finish, and that's what's going to matter more than anything. Even
Yeah.
if they don't end up gaining, let's just say they don't end up having a lot of speed to qualify. They're going to start in the back. They're going to just try to avoid wrecks, and that's just going to get the place differential just from that alone. And then any other big movement through the field with finishing position, that's just a bonus cherry on top right there.
Yeah, I mean, I just look at Justin Haley. It's like since they reconfigured the track, he's got, like you said, 2 top 10s, and then he even, moved up 11 spots in the race earlier this year. So I think this might be the week.
It's certainly possible. Now let's get into our core fours over here. Now for the betting winners, I have right here Ryan Blaney in order to outright win at plus 900, Brad Keselowski at plus 1200, same with Chase Elliott at the same odds, and then Daniel Suarez at plus 1600, and then my long shot, Eric Jones, plus 5,000. I think those odds are way too deep for a driver like Jones, who's consistently finished top 15, even top 10 in quite a few races at this track.
Yeah, Eric Jones has been racing well too. I mean, he looked good last week, so um, I like that plus 5,000. That those are certainly obviously that's an incredible payoff, and this is the type of race where you could get a guy like Eric Jones to win it. So that is absolutely in play. You've probably got 25 drivers or so that you can bet on to win this race, and all have a nice shot. And I'm pretty much the same. I'm Ryan Blaney at Brad Keselowski and Chase Elliott, all the same odds as you. I threw in William Byron in there at plus 1,200. I mean, he's won this race. I think he's won this race twice in the last
That's
four, but he's
correct.
also wrecked in 2 of the other 4. So I think what's interesting about William Byron is I know I threw out here in my betting core for, but he could be a pretty contrarian play from a DFS perspective, just because a lot of people are going to be on the Elliots, the Blaneys, the Brad Kays of the world. So I think Byron could be a very interesting DFS play.
I agree, and especially depending on where he starts, that really could play very big into it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe get him in like the 17th spot or something. I can see that. So we'll see.
We'll see how qualifying shakes out, but that could be one to watch right there. Now, getting into our DFS core fours, I got Ryan Blaney, 10,500 on DraftKings, 14,000 on FanDuel. Chase Elliott at 9,500 on DraftKings, 12,000 on FanDuel. Daniel Suarez at 7,500 on DraftKings and 9,500 on FanDuel. And then rounding it out, I have Justin Haley at 6,100 on DraftKings and 4,200 on FanDuel. Now, Mark, hit us with your DFS core four.
So I'm looking pretty similar. I've got Blaney on DK at 10,500, FanDuel 14. Brad Keselowski I threw in there over Elliott, DK 10,300 and 13K on FanDuel. The thought process there is that maybe just combining those two versus combining one of those two and Elliott will drive a little bit lower ownership. Daniel Suarez, DK 7,500, FanDuel 9,500. We already talked about all the reasons why we like him. I love the Haley play for that you have in there, but I also threw out Austin Cindric just because I like him just as much as Suarez at 7,400 and FanDuel 8. The disclaimer here is that this core, as we get closer, I just think is going to have way too much ownership. I'll have to do some research to see what that actually looks like, but there's probably going to be some pivots in here for me. I'd be surprised if this ends up being my full core by the time the race comes around this weekend.
Oh, for sure, especially when qualifying could very easily swing this in an entirely different direction.
But it's a representation, I would say, of my strategy this week where I'm playing more than one lineup. So these are the guys that are going to make it in some capacity or the other. I just might not have all four in the same exact one.
That's fair. That's pretty valid, I'd say. Alrighty, so with that in mind, that is going to do it for our show today. Thank you very much for sticking around and watching ourselves talk about NASCAR for a little over an hour. Mark, always been a pleasure to have you on again. And any final thoughts here before we head on out?
Oh, no. I mean, I think obviously qualifying will be big. That's going to drive a lot of our decisions. Keep up with us in the Discord. We're getting close. I can feel it. We've had a couple big wins this year. For me personally, it's been a slow couple of weeks. But the process has been there. So just you stick to the process. It's going to pay off here. And this might be the week that we do it.
Trust the process. Trust us. Trust the Race Guru Thunder Hour. Thank you all for watching or listening. We will see you next week.